morning all. So it's been 2 weeks since the end of the contest. In this time I've been playing around with the Imperator. Well, air guitar. This thing is still a bit of an unplayable mess. That's kind of been enough to get a feel for this thing. See what works, see what doesn't, things that need fixing, that sort of thing. Heads up, this video is going to be a bit of a dull, dry mess. Lots of technical detail that no one but me would ever really notice or care about, and plenty of long, nonsensical, rambly bits. You've been warned. Abandon all hope, all ye who carry on watching. Before we go any further, I want to say that I am absolutely 100% dead chuffed with how well this bridge turned out. I can honestly say that it turned out a lot better than I thought it would. So I realised I never really went over my reasons for building this. Guess it's as good a place as any. But I'm one of those weird people who has always kind of doodled mechanisms and technical stuff. I tinker, I take stuff apart all the time. If you believe my parents, I've been doing it since I was a toddler who got his hands on a screwdriver and a wall plug. I mean, it's kind of how my brain works. Now, I wish I'd also had the brains to pass math exams, because I would have absolutely loved a career in mechanical engineering. That's just not to be. The old grey matter and numbers just do not get along. So why am I telling you this? For one, a YouTube audience is cheaper than a therapist. For two, this is kind of a long way of saying that this bridge and 20 odd other variants of it have been squatting in my brain for years, just taking up valuable brain cell real estate. This is why I can't learn how to drive. The space in my brain that should learn how to handle shifting gears is filled up with tremolo plans and lightsabers. Before this, I have never once tried actually making one, and mainly because the Luthier Rod's general consensus is that DIY hardware sucks and purchased hardware rocks. That there is no point in buying about 60 quid's worth of raw materials and applying some elbow grease. Whatever you do will automatically be inferior to a 500 quid bridge from the internet because it doesn't have a brand on it, or even a licensed under Floyd Rose patents engraved somewhere. I drank the Kool-Aid. Although technically being British, I've never drunk Kool-Aid. I drank Robinson's barley water. I wanted to be a pro luthier. So I did what I was told pro luthiers do. I didn't build my own thing. I just resigned myself to a lifetime of saving up for expensive parts with a brand name to them, because as we all know, brand equals good. DIY equals the guitar equivalent of herpes. Then Bogdan popped up last year and just did what I've been thinking about for years. Anyway, I keep mentioning Bogdan, and I try not to make it sound like I'm brown-nosing, but there was something about Bogdan's build last year that just simply blew my mind. It was just, he was doing something that I'd always thought about, and completely unhampered by this whole notion of if it's not Goto or Hipshot or Sharla, then it is suck. That was all the motivation I needed to try and actually do this. And yeah, here we are. I'd say this bridge is about a 90% success. It works great. It works as well as any high-end tremolo that I've played. The action is really smooth, thanks to the 2 needle bearings. It holds tune and it intonates. This is a success. Almost. This is about 90% success. Of that remaining 10%, 5% are little rough edges that need to be smoothed over. Little things that made sense on paper but not quite in real life. And that last 5% is one design flaw that I haven't been able to fix. The cavities are routed a little bit tight. This route at the back here in particular is it's tricky to get in there, especially with my big fat sausage fingers. It's tricky to get in there and tune the individual tuners. You know, that can be remedied with a chisel and some sandpaper. The tremolo arm for once, I thought I'd come up with a really clever, easy to remove system. We could just pop it in, pop it out, and whammy bar around, but this is just windsocking there. There was nothing holding it on. You need to figure out a better way of locking that. Probably some kind of rubber gasket. There was also a distinct lack of fine-tuning that bothers me. To turn the tuners in the first place, first you have to overcome the tension of the string, which gives the tuners just this little bit of inertia, which makes them really hard to turn in small increments. Once they're turning, they'll turn, but just fine adjustment is a bit of a pain in the arse. It's really just a matter of leverage, just stuff Archimedes figured out. If I could get a lever in there, a hex wrench or a screwdriver, I'd have more fine-tuning control. I'd have to modify the tunes a little bit, either cut some slots in the back, or if I could find a rotary brooch and a mill to go with it, get some hex heads cut in the back. I mean, it's okay as it is. It's tunable, it holds string tension, it intonates, which are the 3 key features of the bridge. I also think that the next version of this bridge will be based entirely around tuning everything with a tool rather than by hand. There is a distinct need for fine tuner control with this that is just, it's present on headstock mounted tuners, but it's not present on these kind of tuners. It's worth the inconvenience of having to use a wrench just to be able to tune this a lot more accurately. Now we come to the actual design flaw of this bridge. I'm going to zoom in a second, and I want people to look very carefully at the 3 unwound strings here. when I press the tremolo down all the way. Yeah, can you see that? So, what's the cause of that? The pivot point on this bridge is a lot higher up than it would be on, say, a Floyd Rose, which means that any intonation posts which are forwards of the pivot point will pivot downwards, and therefore the string will lift up and jump off the intonation posts. That would be okay if the strings fell back into the same point on the intonation posts when they drop down, but they don't. See, here's the problem. The harmonica block holds the strings parallel until they hit the intonation posts. When they hit the intonation posts, they start converging all the way down to the nut. Now, when I drop the tremolo all the way down, suddenly the strings are free. There is nothing holding them parallel in the first place. So when it pops back, the strings take the path of least resistance and remain in their convergent locations, which is a problem because that affects the point of intonation. It means every time I dive bomb and reset, the strings have got a slightly different point of intonation. I think this is why most headless trems you see on the market have tuners pretty much low down in the body. That puts more tension in the strings so that the strings don't go jumping out. The trouble is, I can't make something like that. Not with the tools that I have on hand. I tried to remedy this by adding these little tension bars at the back, but they don't really work for the unwound strings because the unwound strings are so far forward of the pivot point. And the tension bars have this annoying side effect of making the guitar very hard to intonate. The strings are now under too much tension to really easily get a hex key in there just to be able to move the intonation post forwards or backwards. While this bridge works, and I'm very satisfied with it, there's still a bit of work to do. Now, I'm working for the Mark II bridge for next year's guitar, and I think that is pretty much going to be a complete redesign from this. One thing I wanted to do with this bridge that's probably not going to happen was to make this an entirely open source design. So I do a full set of instructions, plans, templates, tool lists, material lists, etc. Have it on the internet somewhere and just let people go at making their own bridges. Maybe have a couple of kits professionally made and sell them to people who want to try the bridge without making it from scratch or just don't have the tools or machining skills. However, I think that I am not going to do that. At least not with this bridge. Apart from the whole tension intonation issue, there is one other problem. This does not fit into a standard Floyd Rose route. And that's pretty much a standard for most tremolos. Which makes sense, after all. If someone else were to try making this bridge and they didn't like it, they would then have to fix a non-standard route before they could do anything about replacing the tremolo. Whereas if this followed a standard cavity, then if they didn't like this, they could just take it out, buy one of those headless trems from Amazon or AliExpress, pop that in and replace it. The Bridge Mark II will be designed around that interchangeable standard. So I'm going to keep this one as a prototype, refine it, and next year's bridge will be entirely open source. I really do love this side straw shape. It's not quite ergonomic, but it's definitely ergo adjacent, shall we say. Now see the appeal of the ergonomic guitar shape, and I'm definitely going to be going down that path in the future. The making of ergonomic guitars, that is. Strandberg prices are not in my budget. What I really don't like is this finish. And, okay, I don't like it for two reasons. Technical and thematic. On the technical side of things, the problem was that the idea was actually quite sound, but the materials I used were not. As I've said, I've used these wood veneer strips to finish a guitar before, only here I used unstained veneers, all natural colours. What I didn't account for was that when you stain this veneer with water-based stains, the grain on the edges of the strip will absorb water from the stain and swell up. Not a problem, I hear you cry, just wait until it's dry and sand it back. Okay, so then you have to stain it again because you've sanded off stained areas and there's long white strips everywhere. But once you stain it again, that grain absorbs water and swells up. You guys see the problem, right? It's playing whack-a-mole with raised grain. And after I started gluing in the white strips and the black strips, there was really no way of staining this without the stain bleeding over. So, after a while, I was left with areas that were kind of cupped, flat in the middle of the strips where the water couldn't get to the grain, and swollen on the sides where the grain was exposed. My hope was that that would shrink as it dried, but I had no such luck. So, I was left with a surface that I couldn't sand without running the risk of sanding through everywhere, which makes a good finish more or less nigh on impossible. My last hope was really to drown it in true oil and hope that
the true oil build-up would bulk things up enough. But after 6 days of 5 coats a day, aka the better part of a 3-ounce bottle on this, that just wasn't enough. Now looking back on it, UV cure epoxy might have done the trick, but I only remember that stuff existed after the contest ended, so that was a no-go. On the technical side of things, I think that using stained veneer strips as a finish has a lot of potential, but not this way. This was a mess. If I were to do it again, I would probably use alcohol-based stains rather than water-based ones. Thematically, this late change was also a mess. Like, the last minute switch to the Van Halen-ish theme meant that a few things that I planned out just didn't work anymore. For instance, I'd made some custom scratch plates and mounting rings that were shaped like the panels of a Star Destroyer. But as the Frankenstrap stripes came to the fore, I had to ditch those panels because they just covered all the work I'd done on the stripe side. I had to replace them with these smaller aluminium plates, but I just don't like them as much as the original. And not because the metal was a nightmare to work with, they don't fit with my original vision for this guitar. And I want to return to that vision. This was a crazy idea. It had to be tried, and it didn't pay off. It happens. Experimentation is all part of the creative process. So I'm going to refinish this. When it comes to refinishing, I'm going to strip this all back to the bare ash body and go from there. I'm in two minds as to whether to go for the spray paint finish that I planned for, or saving up for one of those big rolls of ash veneer and just going for a single piece stained veneer. To be honest, I've been leaning towards the latter because I also want to try experimenting with some DIY true oil recipes I found on the internet, so, I mean, why not, right? This is where it all went really wrong. First, let's go over what went right. The neck joint extended cutaway. This went better than I could have dreamed of, frankly. It's as solid as any bolt-on neck joint I ever dealt with. The access to the upper frets is exceptional. The string lock works excellently. As a whole, this is really comfortable to play. Well, air guitar. The only thing I'd change is the asymmetric neck carve, and even then I just tweak the carve profile a bit. Now, what didn't work? The beech plank that I use for the neck is kinda terrible, which is a bit of a surprise because I've made another neck with the rest of this plank, and that neck is as stable as any maple necks that I've ever made or bought, and yeah, I'm as confused as anyone else here. It's a natural material, and I guess some quirks are to be expected. I mean, it's frustrating, but at the very least, that's kind of out of my hands. It's not something I could have planned for. Now, something I could have planned for was the fretboard. I screwed this up royally. This is all really on me. This is pretty much a combination of just not having enough experience with fretwork and not having the right tools to do fretwork. I've made, what, 6 bodies now, but out of that, I've only really made 2 or 3 fretboards. I can practice the skills required to make bodies on any number of woodworking projects. The knowledge will transfer over. But the skills for fretting are fretting specific. You can't really practice them at any other time and place. I would absolutely love to make a guitar every month and get better at it, but I don't have the space for that many guitars. I don't have the budget for that either. Let's face it, as the results won't be good for a while, even if I could, I'd be stuck with junk I wouldn't be able to sell. So the best I can do for now is to save up and invest in some decent fretting tools and hope that they make a difference. I am half tempted to email Crimson and inquire about a custom course that's pretty much all fretwork. Go down for a day or two, radius fret wire, hammer it into fretboards, dress it, etc. But Crimson's prices are just so far out of my budget that I don't think there's even a point asking about that. So yeah, at some point I'm going to remake this whole neck. While my local woodshop doesn't stock maple planks, I have started finding these maple plank offcuts in their scrap wood bin. These are about 1.5 meters long, something like 20 by 15 millimeters. And more importantly, they're sold at £1.20. Over the last couple of months, I've been sneaking in and buying as many as I can. I've got 7 or 8 of these in storage, and I foresee a lot of laminate necks in my future. So I'm going to try and laminate this into a neck. I am not 100% sure of what I'll do for a fretboard. I want to go dark, but I'm not touching oak again, and I'm definitely not staining anything. So that's TBD. I still cannot get the Teensy and my PC to talk to one another, despite the fact that I did so before. All in all, though, that's probably for the best. As I said before, I barely have the code for this written. It's not in its infancy yet, it's more of a code embryo. All the parts are there, I just need to figure out how to get them working all together. I think that for now, I'm going to get everything to run off an Arduino Nano. Controlling this few neopixels really doesn't require that much processing power. And I think that once I've got the hang of what I need to code for things like guitar tuners and MIDI controllers, stuff that absolutely needs the processing power of a Teensy, I will patch the Teensy in. But that is well into the future. Frankly, I have my doubts that that will be ready by next year's GGBO.
probably going to surprise no one that this is my first major video project. Sure, I've done some lightsaber stuff, but that was more to show off to fellow forum members than it was ever intended for a mass audience. I went into this with no idea of what the hell I was doing, and really not much space to do it in. I bought the second-hand Lumix TZ95 and the tripod, downloaded Shotcut, and hope for the best. I have watched a lot of YouTube, and my plan was just to copy successful YouTubers. They seem to know what they're doing, so that kind of ended up with me trying to disal-Tony my way out of this. Which, in hindsight, I think might have been just a bit of a mistake. Let me explain. My original thoughts for this was that each video I made would be done in the style of different YouTubers. The metalwork video was going to be a mix of metalworking YouTubers, disal-Tony, Clickspring, Blondie Hacks. The woodworking videos were going to be done in the style of woodworking YouTubers. Obviously, it didn't quite turn out that way. About halfway through the second video, I'd fallen into a disal-Tony groove, and I stuck with it. It was fun, but I think I went a little too overboard on the jokes. Then the metalwork video kind of exploded. I figured I'd be lucky to hit 500 views on the entire series by the end of the contest. Somehow I got 800 views for that video in 48 hours? That was even before it got added to the official GGBO playlist, which bumped things up again. So, on the one hand, good. There's one thing I'm good at, it's coming up with bad puns and dad jokes. And the audience does seem to enjoy that format, so, you know, it's pretty good feedback and guidelines for where to go next. On the other, more of a criticism than a bad, but I set the bar way too high on that first video. That video was the only one that I had absolutely 100% fully scripted. I'm not a stand-up comedian. It took me about as long to make the damn bridge as it did to write all those gags and jokes and do all the photoshopping for the pictures, and it took too much time. I mean, you might have noticed that all the visual gags disappeared after the second video. They just took too long to make. And I started too late. I didn't have the time to follow through with them, so that was the first thing to get next. I did try to keep the humour up as I was going, but I think I set a standard that I just couldn't reach again in that metalworking video. Lesson learned for next year, start a lot earlier, work on more puns. The big thing I discovered doing this, making stuff on video sucks. I love making video. Adding a camera in there just throws in so much complexity and stress to the whole process, and it just slows things down to a crawl. I mean, gotta worry about getting everything in shot, having to lose already limited workbench space to a camera tripod, dealing with lighting. Do I trust the autofocus, or do I attempt to try and use the arcane manual focus settings? Having to make my mess of a usual workspace photogenic and tidy between every other take. Editing, so much editing. I've got a 128GB SD card in that camera, and I filled it up 7 times. Hours of me going, to leave on the cutting room floor. I hate the sound of my own voice with a fury that I didn't know was possible. I've lost track of the sheer number of times I went on editing well into 3 AM because it's a slow process, and it absolutely had to be done then, or else there just wasn't time. And I can see why people pay editors to do this kind of thing professionally. I wasted over half my budget on a camera. There was no money left for editors after that. Sorry, I'm rambling now. Truth be told, I don't know. I have to remake them. I have to refinish the body. I've also promised videos for those first pickups I made, and some of my adventures in coding when I get round to doing that, so that'll be coming, but when? Your guess is as good as any. Really, when I have time and can work stuff out, if I can work stuff out. Those pickups may just never work. The coding may just be a completely warped thing that's beyond my brain's capability. We'll see. Now, I know some of my fellow GGBO competitors are talking about going into YouTube a bit more, doing a few more build videos in between contests. And yeah, despite all the frustrations of working on camera, I'm genuinely half tempted to join them. The catch is I just really don't know what to do. As I said, I would love to build more guitars, but I just can't afford to do more builds right now. And I don't really have the space to store more builds. Money is definitely getting a problem, but the bigger problem is space. I am very limited in my space, and I am already maxing out what I can do with the space that I've got. I never really said it on camera. The Imperator was going to be my last ever guitar build. That's pretty much the reason I threw in every single crazy and advanced luthier idea I had into this thing. My hope was this was either going to be a Hail Mary win or my swan song as a luthier. You know, at least some validation that the years I spent learning how to do this weren't a total waste. I don't play anymore. I used to, but it stopped being fun and it started being a grind. The thing is, the grind was giving me results. I mean, I was getting good. But like this, I just didn't know where to take it. From where I was standing, the only two options I could see were Either get really good and join cover band, or get really good, get qualified, and become a guitar teacher. Neither have much appeal to me, so I just stopped playing. Around about that time I started making guitars, and making them was a lot more fun, and I've got 8 of them now. 8 home builds that I barely played. The reason I wanted the Imperator to be a sellable guitar was that I'd hoped that I could pass that boundary of making something that's good enough to sell. But I'm not there yet. I'm clearly not there yet. There's really not much point building things just to watch them gather dust. I mean, my old local guitar shop used to buy home builds, but only for parts. My new local guitar shop is a lot more relaxed about it, but unfortunately, in the area where I live, I can only realistically sell a home built guitar for negative money. I cannot make a profit from it. To top all that, we're in a time where the market for custom guitars only wants boutique replicas of 70-year-old guitars, and fuck that. I have no interest in boutique. I despise the boutique aesthetic, and as far as I'm concerned, it's a stagnant mentality that just can go eat a massive bag of dicks. There, I've said it. Probably alienated 95% of my audience in one go. For the last few years, I've kind of felt like I'm at the end of the road. I've taken this about as far as I can go. I would love to do more, but the constraints that I'm under just won't allow that to happen. I am in the very early stages of planning GGBO 22. Bit half-heartedly, if I'm honest. Mainly because I've had a bit of success here, and I might as well just try and see what comes out of it next year, but I don't know, I'm feeling a bit burnt out. And as well as that, unless the rules change massively, I'm probably going to be refurbishing an existing guitar that I've built rather than building a new one, which will put me in the kit build section. And I know that a decent part of the comment section absolutely despises the kit builds and considers that an unforgivable sin rather than a legitimate way of building an instrument. No gatekeeping, people. That's being a dick. Don't be a dick. Yeah, I guess that's all I've really got to say for now. There'll be a few videos coming when I can find the time to make them. Somewhere between now and the next GGBO, I guess. As I said before, this is also a lightsaber channel. So, you know, don't be surprised if the next thing you see from me is a laser sword rather than a guitar. Anyway, it's been fun, folks. Look after one another, take care, and I guess I'll see you guys around.